Alright, so there's a new open beta out, and specifically it's build 1060, and there's a lot of changes and new features that have been implemented in it that I definitely recommend checking out. We're going to go through all the ones for Udon here today. First of all, there's a few things that they want to throw off right off the bat. A new input system for specific events. Now, these specific events are for control inputs. So let's say you press jump. Well, what does jump mean on your computer versus on an Oculus Quest or a Valve Index? Here, we actually have a specific event that gets fired no matter what platform the person is on. So that's jump, use, grab, drop. Those are all events that we now just actually have access to. We get to know whether or not the player's direction is going which way or the likes, so we don't have to be reading Oculus Universal Input Horizontal Left or whatever the actual name of it was, which was pretty dumb. So this makes it a lot easier, and I'll go through how some of this works here just in Unity. So this is the Open Beta SDK in a brand new project, and I'm just in the VRChat examples scene. So let's open up a new Udon behavior and just check out some of that stuff. So I'll just call this open beta and open graph. So namely, we have the new events for the input. So I'm just going to search event input. So here we have input drop, grab, jump. Let's say we want a double jump in our world, or just a boosted jump at any point. Here we have a few different things happening at once. And immediately we have the familiar flow, but we also have some values coming out. For input jump, bool, this will happen for, let's say, event input drop, grab, and jump, and use, here we go, all have a bool that comes out of it, which is a true or false. It is true when you press jump, and false when you release jump. And those individually fire this event. Let's say we wanted to give the player a boost every time they hit spacebar without getting too complex. We'll search branch, connect this in here, and use this bool to tell whether or not the player is presently pressing spacebar or jump. If that is true, then we're just going to give the player some more velocity. So we'll just look up player API, set velocity, and we just want to set their velocity to let's say 4 more in the up direction than what it currently is. So let's just grab the local player information, so networking local player, and figure out what their current velocity is. So get velocity, and let's add 3 to the y, so addition, and let's just add 3 here. And we'll connect that in here, and that'll be the player's velocity. There we go, now it will be. So now this is all linked up, and this should set the player's velocity to be a boosted jump whenever the jump input is found. So before we launch up, we'll put this Udon behavior actually on something. So just have an empty here, search Udon behavior, and we'll put our script onto that, and let's boot up into game. Alright, so we're here in game, we can hit space, and we just mash up, and we fly away. Yeah, so this basically replaces a previous system where we would have to do all of this checking specifically in update, where we would check every frame, oh, is input.getKey down, and then we would list off one of the options, such as spacebar for desktop. And we would have to do that once for every different option for jumping. Now it has been unified into the single input jump that is very useful. Now you might be seeing this thing here that says Udon input event args. So this is just different arguments that can come from these different events. Most of the time you'll only want to worry about them for the hold thing. So we'll search event input. So input drop, let's go with that. So this basically gets, is your hand wide open? So for a lot of people, that's the trigger on the side of the controllers. And for index, that's just your hand being wide open. But let's say we want to know which hand it is specifically. We drag out from this argument here, and we'll do get hand type right here. And we'll just drag out from here and search equality. So hand type equals. Now at the moment, this plugs it into the wrong slot. So we actually need to put this into OBJ. That should be fixed in the live version, but at the moment, this is just a small technical bug. But here we can check whether or not the hand that is presently dropping something is the right hand or the left hand. And we can just do something here with the bool. So branch. And here, since we're checking to see if the right hand is doing something, we would do right-handed things through true and left-handed things through false, because if this is false but something's still being dropped, it's from that hand. All right, so now we can move on to Udon Midi Support. Hooray! So I actually don't own a MIDI controller, so I can't test a lot of this stuff, but they've implemented a system where we can actually read MIDI events inside of VRChat. And we actually have a test world that we can go to right here that allows us to see some of the stuff that you can do with it, basically playing it up on a screen. And setting that up is actually pretty simple. We'll just go back into our scene, and let's say we want to register MIDI events on this object. So like for this script, we need to go here and search MIDI and do MIDI listener, and then drag our Udon behavior into that slot. Now, if we want to listen for specific events, such as note on, note off, or change control, we have to toggle those right here. So we can go into our graph again, and now that we're reading for those, we can register the specific events that are being called for that. So if I search event MIDI control MIDI note on, let's go with this one. Here, we can do things dependent on the channel of the note, the number for it, or the velocity. Again, I don't have a MIDI controller, so I can't actually test any of this. So hopefully those of you out there with MIDI controllers know what to do and know which one I should buy. Leave a link in the comments to whatever MIDI controller you think I should end up purchasing, because eventually I will need one for VRChat stuff like this. Back to the updates, Udon now supports animation curves and gradients. These tend to be for some more complicated things that people like to implement, and I don't have too much experience with it myself, but I know that they're incredibly useful in those situations. So let's do an animation curve and just set this to be public. I'll just call this curve. So you see now in our Udon behavior, we have a public curve that we can click on and then set a specific thing going on in here. We can set anything to do with this, and then we can do things based off of this information, such as moving an object programmatically rather than through a script or something. So there's a lot of power behind it that I have yet to fully utilize, so we'll get to that one soon enough. And then we also have gradients for colors. So new gradient. So over here, we actually have our spot for a gradient. So we can click that, and like gradients in any other part of Unity, we can just adjust this as we like. We can change anything we want there, and it all shows up here, and we can read this information through Udon. Next, we have on respawn event. This means we can now check whether or not a player has respawned. So if someone has respawned, we can give them like a little pop-up information. I feel this will largely be used for handling in game worlds to figure out whether or not someone has respawned out of a game or the likes. So we'll just do event respawn. And there we go. Now this is a global event, so if anyone ever respawns, you'll know specifically who did it through here. And if we want to chastise this user, we can yell at them or something, but largely you'll probably want this specifically for the local player. So you'll largely follow this one up with is local. And then this will go into a branch to check whether or not that's true. And then you will continue on with your event. Next we have performance improvement for groups. Now, groups are something in VRChat that not many people use. They tend to be very useful on the small scale rather than the large scale, which is kind of inverse of what their purpose is. Here, I'll show you a quick example here. If I just search player, we can look at the default video player prefab and its Udon behavior, and you'll see it is relatively big. So this is the Udon behavior that handles the video player that we have default in the SDK. So if you see here, everything's in these groups. Now, the problem with having groups in a large graph is that graphs like to recompile once for each node that is in a group, which isn't very convenient. With these improvements, actually, we can just do, let's say, a new debug log, and we can just drag that in here, and you'll see we can immediately start moving it around and everything. But you'll notice that when we start fiddling around with anything that exists previously in the graph, so let's say I want to just disconnect this here, if I let go of it, you'll notice that I immediately get some hitching, and it starts to think a bit, the groups disappear, and eventually it'll all be back and have finished calculating everything. But there's still a bit of improvement that can be done on it. But now that you see we've done that, I can just plug this in here, and it's basically instant again. And when I try to plug this one in, it starts hitching again as well, so who knows exactly what it is that they fixed, but it's definitely performing better now that we can just drag something into the group without it immediately recompiling. But I look forward to seeing these groups becoming a bit more usable. Next we have graph search, new subcategories for less used items. So typically, since I know what nodes I want ahead of time, I'll just do space search and then start typing out things. But let's say you don't know specifically what you want, and you want to have something related to a game object. Like, let's say you want to turn a game object on, but you're like, turn on, and that's not showing up in any of the searches. So you go into the game object one, and there's a lot of just stuff in here. But it used to be a lot more cluttered. Now at the bottom we have get component related things and other related things. These are where you typically have things that you probably won't ever use, but still need to be available for people who do need to use them. So in other, we have game object equality and game object implicit and toString and just different stuff like that. Basically things that are very rarely used, but even though they're inside of these dropdowns, that does not keep them from showing up in the search. So if I just look implicit, this one still shows up perfectly fine despite it being inside of this other category. And lastly, we have the ability to copy, clear, reverse, binary search, and other things for different arrays. So these are some features that are natively supported with arrays in Unity, but we just haven't had exposed as until now. So let's just have an array of game objects here. And I'll just call this objs and set this to be public. Let's get like 8 of them in here. So if we want to do fancy things with these arrays here, we can just go space to search, type array, and then hit enter. And in here is a bunch of the different things that we can now do with arrays. We used to be able to do some of them, but now we have a lot more of a expanded library of things we can do. Let's say we can reverse the entire array. We can copy it to anything. We can clear it, just set it to be all empty, and a bunch of different stuff. And lastly, there have been some library reference updates for different things that VRChat uses, such as post-processing, AV Pro Video, and ONSP, the audio library that Oculus manages for Unity integration. The only one we need to worry about here is the AV Pro update, as here it points out that worlds that are already using AV Pro will need to be re-uploaded in order to be functional with the current version of AV Pro. This was a breaking update that would have had to happen sooner or later, so it's good to have it now before we get the upcoming networking update that we hope to see in the next month or so. And that should be it for going through all the different updates and features in the Udon open beta right now, version build 1060. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you around next time.